Hi, I'm Pat Gwyer, clinical psychologist, and today I'd like to talk to you about the myth of positive and negative emotions. I'm going to be using the flip chart to try and help me explain this, but everything I talk about is going to be available on the PDF that accompanies this video. So everything I write down here and everything I talk about is going to be available on the PDF that you can download. So sometimes clients say to me about feeling positive and negative emotions, and they have this idea that maybe they should try and feel more positive emotions and they should try and experience less negative emotions. And that leads to a really interesting conversation about what makes an emotion positive or negative. So the easiest way to do this is to give an example. So let's take fear as our example. So is fear a positive or a negative emotion? Now what most people say is, well, it kind of depends, doesn't it? Sometimes if fear stops me doing something dangerous, it can be a positive emotion. But if fear stops me doing something, it can be a negative emotion. So it gets really confusing. Is fear positive or negative? The way to get around that is to not think of emotions as positive and negative. And I'm going to talk a bit more about some problems with positive and negative emotions later on. The skill is to think about the intensity at which you feel the emotion. So here on my line, I have 10, which is feeling the emotion really, really strongly. And here, I have 0, not feeling the emotion at all. So let's go back to our example of fear. Let's imagine that I feel so much fear that it stops me going out of the house and it stops me doing things because I'm really scared that something bad's going to happen. So I'm up here and it's 10. That intensity is not warranted for certain situations. So if the emotion is felt at this really high intensity, it is often unhelpful. Similarly, if I never felt any fear and it stopped me doing things that would keep me safe, so maybe I felt no fear and I drove down the motorway really, really fast and I was a danger to myself and others, not feeling that emotion at all would also be unhelpful. But what about if I felt just the right amount of fear? The right amount of fear that was appropriate to the situation and was able to keep me safe. So, for example, what if I felt just the right amount of fear and it stopped me walking down a dark alleyway at night? That would be appropriate to the situation and it would be helpful. So, what you can see here is it's not the emotion itself which is positive or negative. It is the intensity at which we feel that emotion and whether or not it's helpful when we feel it at the right level and whether or not it's unhelpful. So the obvious question people say is, well, how do I know if this intensity is appropriate? That kind of leads really nicely into mindfulness. So one of the things that we can talk about is the 3 types of mind that we can have. Here, we can have, let's call it our logical mind. It deals with facts. It might be like Mr. Spock from Star Trek, only deals with facts, only deals with logic. At this other end, we might have our emotional mind. And this is only the part of our mind that can only focus on what we're feeling. At other times, when we have the balance, when we can balance logic and emotion, we're in the middle here. We're in wise mind. And it's when we're in wise mind, we can find out if the intensity of the emotion is appropriate, is it warranted, and is it proportionate. So being in wise mind, having the balance of intellect and emotion helps us know if the emotion we're feeling at this moment in time is helpful or unhelpful. So the first thing to think about for emotions is not if they are positive or negative, but whether or not feeling this emotion at the intensity at which I'm feeling it, if it's helpful or unhelpful. And the way I do that is by getting into my wise mind, and I do that through mindfulness. So by being mindful, I can ground myself in the here and now. I can notice my emotion, not become overwhelmed by it, not become the emotion. I can use my logical mind to appraise and evaluate that emotion. And then I can, in wise mind, act in a helpful way. So I hope that makes sense, this idea that emotions aren't positive or negative. They're either helpful or unhelpful, depending upon the intensity at which the emotion is felt, and if that intensity is appropriate to the situation, if it's warranted in light of what is happening around you, and if it is proportionate. So we have to think about those things to work out if our emotion is helpful or unhelpful. We can't do that if we think of emotions as positive or negative. Emotions are simply emotions. They are as they are. So one of the other problems we have is when people think about positive or negative emotions, what they sometimes do is they think, well, I shouldn't feel this. I should feel happy. I should feel excitement. I shouldn't feel these negative emotions. I should feel these positive emotions. So they make judgments about their way they feel, and they feel that feeling one emotion or another emotion is positive or negative, so they start to make judgments about themselves. When they start to make judgments about themselves, they then start to feel guilt or shame or anger or frustration. Now in psychology, we call these secondary emotions. So if you feel an emotion and you think you shouldn't feel that emotion, you make a judgment about yourself, you then appraise that judgment, and more emotions then come. So you can start with one emotion and then another emotion, and it can very easily spiral. The other problem with positive and negative emotions is emotions don't work on a light switch. You know, sometimes when you go into a school or an office, you might see a box like that, and it will have a light switch and all these different switches. This might do the front row, this might do. So what people think is, do you know what I'll do? I'm going to turn off these lights. I'm going to turn off these emotions because they're unhelpful, because they're unpleasant, because they're negative. But these ones here are positive. So what people try and do sometimes is they try and say, do you know what? I want to feel these emotions which are positive, but I don't want to feel these emotions which are negative. Well, first of all, that doesn't really work, because emotions are not positive or negative. They are as they are. It's the intensity. So if I try and block out fear because I think it's unhelpful, that's going to be really hard for me to do. The other thing is, when you block out emotions, they're not on this separate thing. So I don't have happiness there, fear there, anxiety there, worry there, sadness there, oh gosh, depression there, excitement there. What I actually have is one big master switch, and that switch is either on or off. So if you try and block out one emotion, what you find out is you block out other emotions. So trying to block out certain emotions doesn't work. All it does is numb us to the effect of emotions. Let me show you what happens when we do that. So this is 0 and this is 10. So this is that really explosive, uncomfortable feeling. Now I've drawn it as a spike. Now the reason it's a spike is, imagine a horse chestnut, one of those really, really prickly things that you hold in your hand, and the spikes really, really dig into you. So what do people do? These spikes, they're really uncomfortable. So what people try and do is they try and wrap the emotion up. They try and bury it. They try and push it down. But all that happens is the spikes stick through. Now, if I only think of positive emotions and negative emotions, if I'm trying to feel positive emotions so that I don't feel negative emotions, all I'm doing is putting more bubble wrap around my feelings, and those feelings will come out. If I try and switch my emotions off and not feel them, what happens is people push their emotions down. So they push them down to 0, and they say they feel numb, they feel nothing. And what's really interesting about things that we don't want to think about, if I say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, whatever you do, don't think of a pink elephant, don't think of a pink elephant ice skating surrounded by lots of little penguins, you start to think of a pink elephant. So the more we try and push something away, the more we try and avoid it, it bubbles up, bubbles up, bubbles up, often goes back to there, and it goes to pop. Wow, this is really uncomfortable, this is really unpleasant, so what am I going to do? I'm going to push it down. I don't like it, it's horrible, so I'm pushing it down, I feel numb, and then out of the blue it goes pop. Now, in psychology, we have a really interesting way that we define that, because it's how people describe it to us. When people go from this numb, empty feeling to this very overwhelmed feeling, they describe it as a living hell. What happens, let's just turn this on its side. Let's imagine our line is there and 0 and 10 is up there. So when it's on its side like that, what happens is the motion builds up, builds up, builds up. It gets really uncomfortable. People think, gosh, I don't like this. This is really unpleasant. I'm going to jump off. I'm going to avoid. I'm going to escape my emotion, and I feel better. But then what happens? It bubbles up, and it happens again, and people start doing more of the same. In this bit here, this avoidance and escape of emotions, this is often where you find things like self-harm, alcohol, drug use, other types of behaviours that people are doing to block out that emotion. The problem is, the more I try and block out that emotion, what I'm doing is I'm making it much more powerful. So I mentioned that we have a term for this in psychology, and it's what our patients, our clients call it, and they often talk about it feeling like a living hell. They feel like, do you know, I don't know if I'm here or if I'm there. One minute I feel fine, I feel nothing, I feel empty, then the next minute I feel completely overwhelmed. And they just go backwards and forwards between these 2 points, and they become afraid of their emotions. When you're afraid of your emotions, you give them more power. And what we want to do is we want to take the power away from the emotions. We want you to be in charge of your emotions, not your emotions in charge of you. So, going back to this idea of positive and negative emotions, let's just catch up what we've talked about so far. It is the intensity of the emotion which makes it helpful or unhelpful. It is whether or not that intensity is appropriate, proportionate, and warranted to what has happened. And it's by using mindfulness that we can work out and be aware of our emotion, but not overwhelmed by it. So in effect, if we imagine this is us, it's my very bad stickman drawing, we have a foot in both camps. We have our logical awareness, the front part of our brains, and we have our emotional part of our brains, the limbic system kind of just at the back there, and we can get those 2 in balance. When they're in balance, we are in what we call wise mind. And when we're in wise mind, we can act from a point of wisdom. We can act in a safe way, a helpful way. So that's hopefully the first thing that helps us explain why emotions aren't positive or negative. The next thing is we can't have a light switch where we turn off and turn on some emotions. So we can't turn on certain emotions that we want to feel, and we can't turn off others. We basically have a big switch, and that big switch works for all of our emotions. But what we can do is we can regulate our emotions. Now, when we talk about emotional regulation, what we mean is we tune into how our body is feeling. And when we tune into our body's feelings and what we're aware of, and we can do this through mindfulness, we can do this through reflection, we can start to notice how we're feeling. We can notice what behaviours, what thoughts, what actions go with certain emotions, and we can do those things that increase or decrease the intensity of an emotion. The other reason I want to talk about why emotions aren't positive or negative, there's a very old finding in psychology called Yerkes-Dodson. Now, Yerkes-Dodson is what they call an inverted U shape. And you can do this for anything. You can do it for stress, you can do it for anxiety, you can do it for perfectionism is a really good one. Let's use perfectionism as an example. So let's say here, if I wanted to be perfect, if I wanted to have my perfectionist at 100%, it's really going to be quite unlikely. Now this here is performance. So if I had no idea or no desire to do a really good job and I wasn't too worried about perfectionism, I might be down here near the low end. But if I was really 100% certain that I wanted to be really, really spot on and get this right, 100% perfect, I'll be down this end. Now what happens with this, just like stress, so we can put this for perfectionism, we can put this for stress. Let's leave those two examples, perfectionism and stress. So I need to feel a certain amount of stress so that I perform. But if I feel too much stress, over this way for example, my performance decreases. So again with perfectionism, sometimes I want to feel that I need to get this perfect. I need to get this kind of actually in the middle. Good enough. I can't spell good enough, sorry about that. So I need to be in the middle, good enough. So it's not actually the emotion, it's not what we're feeling. Remember this idea of intensity. So intensity is going this way. If I don't feel enough of it, if I feel none of it, it's unhelpful. If I feel too much of it, it's unhelpful. So you probably have already noticed that what you can very easily do is you can draw our wise mind circles back on there. That's probably not very clear. I'll just draw it on another one to make it a bit clearer. So if you remember, this is the Yerkes-Dodson law. That there is intensity, that's 100%, that's 0%, and here is performance. And at the top, let's have good and not so good. So, as the intensity goes up, I get better and better. I then have my peak bit up here, and then at the bottom it comes down. So let's just put those back into the mindfulness circles. So here we have reasonable, logical, facts are Mr. Spock. Let's try doing a different colour. Here we have our emotional mind. So here the intensity has got too much. Here the intensity isn't enough. But in the middle, if you remember what that's called, in the middle we have our wise mind. Now, one of the reasons why this is important is if you can understand this and you can understand how our bodies work and how our biology has been designed through evolution, we know that our emotions are designed to create action. They're designed to help us fight, flight, freeze, or appease. They're in there, they're designed to help us survive. Now, nature would not spend time developing something that was positive or negative. What nature would do is have something evolve that was going to either help your survival or not be helpful. And it would not invest all the time needed to develop a skill if it wasn't going to have a survival function. The survival function of emotions is they are pulling you towards something or they are pushing you away from something. Now, a pleasant emotion might pull me towards something and an unpleasant emotion might push me away from something. So a pleasant emotion might be if I do this, this happens and it's a reward and I get food. If this happens, it's unpleasant and it pushes me away. They're designed to be functional. They're designed to keep us safe and alive. Now, the reason I'm taking so much time to explain this to you is sometimes you may have seen those things where people say we have a choice. We can choose how we can feel, choose to be happy. And people talk about the choice, you know, that I have a choice to be happy. I have a choice to feel the way I feel. And I kind of struggle a bit with that because I'm not so sure we have a real choice. You only have a choice if you have an alternative. So I think the idea about choosing a positive or a negative emotion, unless you know how to regulate your emotions and be in control of them, it's a Hobson's choice. And a Hobson, he was a man who lived 350 years ago in England. And it was in the days where people travelled around with stagecoaches and by horses. And people would want to get a new horse to carry on their journey. And he would say, you can have this horse, but you've got to take this one here. So he gave them a choice. But it wasn't a real choice because there was no alternative. Henry Ford did something very similar. He allegedly said, you can have any colour you want as long as it's black. So it's not really a choice. You can't choose how you feel unless you know how to be in control of your emotions. And when we try and, if I go back to this emotion here, when we try and bubble wrap our emotions and we try and just cover them up and feel positive emotions because we don't want to feel the negative emotions, it becomes really, really unhelpful. What we do is we give our emotions more power. We become afraid of them. So what we really need to be able to do is tune into our emotions, to be aware of our emotions, to get the balance between logic and emotions, and then get ourselves into wise mind by being mindful, by breathing, by taking a slow breath in and a long breath out, by maybe doing relaxation techniques, by doing some exercise. Do you know, sometimes just stepping out of the situation, going for the walk is a really good way to just bring you back, to get you into the here and now. When we've done all of that, we can then say, do you know what? The intensity at which I'm feeling this emotion is unhelpful. Sometimes we might need to increase that intensity. Sometimes we might need to decrease it. Remember, emotions are a bit like a wave. They come and they go. And often we can forget that. We can kind of think, do you know what? When I'm feeling sad, so let's put my unhappy face down there. So when I'm feeling sad, it kind of feels like I'm going to be sad forever. But turn it on your head. I really like watching Modern Family. I really like watching Big Bang Theory. I really like watching those funny programs, and they make me laugh and they make me feel happy. The thing is, I don't feel happy forever. I don't feel happy for a long period of time. I might feel happy for an hour or so, hopefully. But I accept that those happy emotions come and go. But when we feel those unpleasant emotions, we kind of think they're going to last forever. And we forget that, you know what? Emotions come and go. And if I can let that emotion come and go, I am in control of my emotion. I'm not afraid of my emotion. The problem with being afraid of your emotions and the problem of using positive and negative emotions to make yourself feel better is if I use positive emotions to avoid my unpleasant emotions, I have to be really, really careful that nothing in life is going to upset me or no bad things are going to happen that are going to make me feel negative emotions. Well, that's impossible. How can I do that? So that makes me hyper-vigilant. I keep on the lookout for anything that might cause a problem. That is so tiring. And of course, what happens when you're tired, when you're stressed, your vulnerability to your emotions increases. So trying to constantly build positives into your life so that you don't feel negatives is kind of counterproductive. It doesn't work. It makes you hyper-vigilant. It makes you fearful of your emotions. What we need to do is be in the driving seat. We need to be in control of our emotions. We need to be able to say to, hey, do you know what, emotion? Bring it on. We're going to step back from our emotion and we're going to say, do you know what? Instead of saying, I'm sad, I'm scared, we're going to say, I am feeling sad, I am feeling scared. I am feeling this emotion, but I am more than this emotion. And I can do a lot to control that emotion. I just need the skills to make the choice. If I don't have the skills, I can't make the choice. The skills are easy. Like everything, once you know how, it's easy, but it's really hard to do. We have to accept that emotions come and go. We have to accept that we are more than our emotions. They're part of us, but they're not the defining part of us. We can tune in, and remember earlier, I talked about an idea of 0 to 10. So if I tune into my emotions, and let's say wise mind is around 4, 5, and 6. So I tune into my emotion and I start to think, you know, it's becoming a bit too intense. What I can do is I can do things to reduce that intensity. These are my emotional regulation skills. This reduces the intensity. If I'm at the top there, this is my surfer. Do you know what? This emotion is so, so powerful. There is nothing I can do. I have to surf it until it goes down. Because if I try and avoid it and I try and push it away, I get caught in that repeating cycle that I talked about earlier. Of not wanting to feel the emotion, avoiding it, jumping down and escaping, not wanting to feel the emotion, jumping down, and I get caught in it. So I have to just be able to surf it. Now, I've given a really lot of detail today. It's gone on a little bit longer than I was hoping, and I think there's a lot of detail. Everything I've talked about is available in the PDF that is attached to this video. It's called The Myth of Positive and Negative Emotions. What I want you to do is just tune into your emotions a little bit more effectively, not think about them as positive or negative, but whether or not to think about if you are feeling the emotion at the intensity at which you are feeling, if it is helpful. You will do that by getting into wise mind, where you balance logic and emotion together. By being aware of how your body works, we have an autonomic nervous system that is attached to our limbic system and our amygdala, which is at the back of our brain. That is a very biological thing. It's taken millions of years of evolution. We'll never beat the evolutionary system. So let's work with it. Let's know that we've got the autonomic nervous system, which has 2 parts. One part that excites us and arouses us and gets us ready for action, and one part that calms us down. So let's use our skills to calm that emotion down, to make it manageable, so that we're not afraid of it, so that we don't say, I am feeling this, or sorry, so we don't say, I am this emotion. We say, I am feeling this emotion, and this is what I'm going to do to make that emotion more manageable. That way I have a real choice in how I manage my emotions. That's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. Everything I've talked about, as I say, is available on the download, which is attached to that. If you have any questions or comments, please message me. And thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a lovely day.